Well, everyone, welcome Faye Jackson, director of Strigoi. Hope you all enjoyed the film. I find every time I watch this film, I like it more and more. I find humor where I didn't realize there was humor last time. This was my fourth time watching it, and I think I laughed through the entire film, which I hope was intended.
Yes, yes. Yeah, no, that's brilliant to hear.
Wonderful. So I'm Rae Muhlstock. I'm the chair of the film festival. I have my colleague Barney here, and we've got a number of questions for you. And then we'll invite members of the audience up to ask questions as well.
That's great.
Great. So where do you want to start?
I think we'll just start at the beginning, which is to say, how did this product or this production get started? What was it that inspired you? Anything you can tell us about how this thing became true?
Yeah, I spent a lot of time in Romania. My daughter's father's Romanian. I spent so much time there. I have a Romanian family, and I suppose I watched it for years, many years as an outsider. And there was lots of different things I was particularly interested in. One was how Romanians felt about Bram Stoker's Dracula and that version of the vampire tale, and they just find it hilarious. They take the piss out of a lot of the very Western ideas of vampires, and I was really interested in just the sort of traditions around funerals which implied sort of Strigoi-like beliefs, and then I found out more and more about the legend of Strigoi, and there were really instances in smaller villages where people were digging up bodies after a couple of years and cutting parts out. I mean, this is something that actually happened fairly recently. And you know, a lot of my interest in sort of recent Romanian history kind of went into the story as well. And I was really fascinated by the smaller villages in Romania, which seemed to be in this sort of time capsule. You know, in some ways it felt like you were sort of visiting the 19th century, but in other ways they were very modern. So I kind of wanted to capture that, and also capture parts of Romanian history that I felt hadn't been explored in the films that I had seen. So I just lots of different things from my experiences in Romania went into the film. But I love the legend of Strigoi itself. You know, it sort of reminds me a little bit of some sort of stories about witches in Scotland. But there is, again, it sort of always seems quite funny. You know, one story I really liked had someone going to bury their uncle, and then coming back to the house, and the uncle was there sitting in their favourite chair and eating their food, and I just really related to that in terms of just a story that could talk about family and history and a lot of different things. So it was probably quite random, but there were lots of different ideas and different strands that went into the film.
So just like the vampire, as you mentioned, we have this sort of Bram Stoker humanoid version, we have this older folklore version. The vampire is sort of occupies a liminal space between old and new. Vlad seems to symbolize that tension as well between old traditions of the village and modern medicine and culture. And it's really telling that ultimately he submits to the very thing he's been trying to escape. Including the medical procedure that he wasn't able to do in medical school, opening the chest cavity and removing the organ. Can you speak for a moment about how you see traditional folklore fitting or perhaps not fitting into modern cultures as we move towards increasing knowledge and technology? How does this film, as well as some of your other recent projects, I'm thinking maybe Changeling most specifically, but I'm sure that the projects you're currently working on as well, explore these same tensions between old and new in terms of folklore?
Yeah, I think that's very personal to me. I think I always just relate to folklore stories very strongly, and I think they often are sort of tell greater truths about the human condition, about so the parts of us that are so difficult to explore in a more scientific or clinical way are, you know, sort of the darker recesses of our psyches. And I think, I suppose in Strigoi, there is that tension between, he's very much a detective, you know, he's very much sort of scientifically trying to sort everything out, and there are just, whatever he does, there are sort of darker and deeper and more inexplicable parts of his own life, of his own history, of his own family history, you know, the history of the village. So everywhere he goes and tries to you know, apply more clinical scientific methods, you know, everything he faces is less and less explicable and more and more about the sort of the darker, more don't know, the more the more folkloric aspects of the human psyche.
Right.
Yeah, and in terms of my other work, it's just, I think it's something that I've always related to stories, and I think it's just my own perspective. I must just have a very I don't know, old-fashioned or medieval way of seeing things. I like the kind of the literalness of folklore, of these kinds of legends. I think it's just a lot easier to discuss, you know, the way, the human condition and the way people are.
This brings me maybe back to the issue of humor, because I was also struck by it. And I'm wondering how you would explain where it derives from. Is it perhaps an actual part of the folklore tradition in Romania to have this kind of black humor? Or is it partly also Faye Jackson in the way she comes at things? Did these two things mesh up, or how do you stratify or separate those things out, if at all?
Yeah, I would say it's both. I mean, I would say, you know, again, often in a lot of Romanian cinema, you know, they're often very, I mean, there is often some very dark humor, but sometimes I find it very serious in a way which I don't think actually reflects Romanian culture. I think there is a lot of humor, and especially in the kind of response to communism, to a lot of historical experiences. I think the country, you know, I think that often the human response is, you know, to have this very dark kind of gallows humor when you do go through these sort of hugely traumatic kind of historical experiences. Definitely, I have a very dark sense of humor as well. Definitely, that is in everything I do. So that definitely, that probably explains why I get on with Romanians so well, and why I enjoy Romanian culture so well. You know.
I'm not trying to summarize everything about your work, because I've only seen the shorts on your website. But if I think about Changeling, I think about Snowflakes, the woman who hid her feet under the stairs. You have focused a lot on female protagonists, and then we come to this film, We Arrive at the Mob. So I'm interested in what happened there and how love appeals to you, or how he emerged as the protagonist for this.
Yeah, I mean, I think I like him, and one of the reasons I like him, he was sort of inspired by someone I know in Romania. I think I like the character because he's very atypical as a hero. I think I like, you know, that idea that by Romanian culture is very macho. That, you know, everyone thinks he's weak because he you know, he's failed as a doctor, he's considered to have failed in all these different ways. But, you know, his strength sort of lies elsewhere, his strength in terms of his persistence and really his moral codes is elsewhere. So I kind of like him in that way. I have actually, I've read a lot of things with male protagonists. I think more recently I've read more and more with female protagonists, and that's something that's happened over my career, and certainly within the past maybe 5, 6 years. I think almost everything I've read has female protagonists. And I don't know why. I think there just has been so many stories that I think sort of haven't been told from a female perspective, and I think that's just something that I've become really interested in recently. Yeah.
But there's one link that I noticed, a possible link, which is Vlad keeps hearing over and over from different characters that he's a pussy.
Yes.
And this feminine gendering of him, right, correct or not, that does seem to suggest, as you say, that he's not the typical male.
I mean, he swoons like a Victorian heroine.
That's funny. For me, that is very much based on the kind of machismo that is in Romania, and it's a funny one because in some ways there's a kind of an egalitarian streak in Romania, but that sort of comes from communism because women were very much given the same level of jobs and the same sort of opportunities as men on a professional level, but still on a personal level, there's still a lot of, I guess, Eastern European machismo kind of in the culture as well. I think that was more, I can see what you're saying, but that was very much more a kind of observational thing about machismo. And again, I suppose some of the fun of the story is, Vlad, who isn't a typical hero, and then Mara, who is probably just not even seen by lots of characters, who's also one of the ones who's really sort of realizes what's going on and has a moral code and sort of fights back. So yeah, it was more that he was atypical male than that, but yeah, I see what you're saying, yeah.
So, Faye, you mentioned his moral code a few times. In a lot of ways, Vlad's movement in the film mimics that of the Strigoi. He leaves, he's changed, he returns, he doesn't quite fit into that world that he left behind. It's hilarious to me and it's sad that all of his attempts to leave this tradition break him deeper and deeper into it. This parallelism makes him a really wonderful moral center in this film. Can you talk a little bit about that decision to make your center of the film both an insider and an outsider simultaneously?
Again, a lot of it sort of started from observation. It's been very prominent. There's been a huge kind of skills drain, brain drain in Romania. A lot of people after communists just left. A lot of people went to, especially more working class people from the villages went to Italy. Everyone went everywhere else in Europe and the States. So I started looking at that, and then I think that has encouraged this culture where there is a sort of a break between the generations, and there is this sort of issue in the villages where there's been such a drain on people there, a lot of traditions are really dying, so there is that huge break. So some of that was the reality of that, but a lot of it was also the break in kind of the generation had a revolution, because I think there was that sort of situation where, in terms of corruption, there was a generation who really had hope that the corruption would change from communism to capitalism, and that there would be this huge change, and they were quickly hugely disappointed. So I think it was more a kind of nod to his generation in a way, who had a very different set of experiences than their parents and grandparents. So yeah, it was probably more kind of from that observational point, but perhaps as well, kind of from an audience point of view, that he's the eyes of the audience as well, in terms of this kind of mystifying kind of levels of corruption and history of corruption, and how do you approach that in a moral way when it's almost impossible to work with the system, work within the system. That makes sense.
Yes.
I have a production question that may have links to other parts of the film and the story. So I would like to know, what was it like finding Romanian actors who were that fluent in English? And does this have something to do with the status of Romanians, either in the EU or internationally, that might be interesting?
It was finding actors of a certain age, maybe 40 and under, with really good English. All of them did, all of them had really good English. Older actors, it was really hard, and then often we had to work pretty hard with the actors who were older in terms of making sure that they could get lines. And just in general, it was an extra kind of issue we were always dealing with, which is it's very hard for somebody to be working in the second language, particularly, those of the cast who weren't, whose English simply wasn't as good. I feel like I saw every actor in Romania. I felt like at the time I met pretty much every actor in Romania. I was very lucky. I was very lucky, and I think what was brilliant was there were quite a lot of theatre actors involved in the end, and I think they were some of them maybe had less screen experience, but were just really good actors who often just had brilliant characterful faces and were just so right for the part that the extra effort that we kind of had to make sometimes with the English was just worth it. So.
Yeah, I asked too because of the sense we get of Romanians in the film, which is that they're not exactly comfortable at home, and then many of them are kind of either exiles of some kind, it seems, right? Going to Italy, he remarks to the policeman that Venice is full of Romanians. And there's this sense of Romanians as often displaced, often by choice, maybe not, but don't feel feel so much out of place. He says, forget it, and goes back. There's an interesting element there of the Romanians feeling out of place where they are at home, as well as if they go somewhere else.
Yeah, I don't know. I would have said it was maybe just Vlad who really feels out of place. I think of the characters, he was the one I put feeling really out of place, sort of in the village, rather than necessarily. I can see what you're saying about Octave. I think more he is the sort of the outsider, even though he's not. Yeah.
Faye, I want to ask you about greed in the film. There's so much of it. Every character wants something. It's not just the Tiraspes whose greed follows them, into their death, but the townspeople taking the possessions of the Tiraspes, the cigarettes being passed back and forth. Absolutely hilarious. The Dracula-type humanoid, seductive, sexy vampire often has deep associations with capitalism. And especially in upper class greed, this has been a conversation we've been having throughout the weekend. But how do these more traditional folklore, Strigoi, and especially the townspeople factor into that dynamic? Is it that want of capitalism that you mentioned earlier? Is it something, a holdover from communism, or do you think there's something else in humans, in Strigoi, and vampires?
Very human, and I think I think for all of them it's very human. People trying to work within the system they're in, and it's a very corrupt system. And absolutely, the Tiraspes are kind of monsters, but everyone else is trying to get the best out of the system as well. And I think certainly in some of the communist countries, ex-communist countries, there was this scenario where everything that happened in the States was kind of up for grabs. And a lot of people, it is all based on real stuff in terms of all of these lands, all of the land that had belonged to people before communism, that people try to get it back. you know, and I think it is very human in that situation to think, well, if I don't get this now, if I, you know, if everybody is going for the land, if everybody is going for what they can get, I think it's absolutely human to feel that if I don't, then I'm going to be left holding nothing. And I think definitely there was looting, you know, in the revolution, and I think, you know, that's more complicated, I think, because, you know, the communists did take everything, and, you know, so much of it was just years and years of being lied to and controlled and the resentment. I do think kind of the sort of part afterwards where everyone was trying to, you know, the world was changing so fast and everyone was trying to sort of get a part of this new world. But then, of course, in the end, it was a lot of people who were high up in the Communist Party who were in the position to actually, you know, take what had been the states anyway. I mean, I think it's more human nature, and I think it's absolutely, it's that just a natural instinct we have to compete and to feeling that if we don't, there is this sort of scarcity feeling that we don't get what's there, then we will be left with nothing.
Another dimension for this for me had to do with what is a Strigoi anyway? Because there's a crucial moment that you introduce, I don't know, about 2/3 of the way in, when someone says, well, you can die, I'm paraphrasing, you can die becoming Strigoi, or you could just be born a Strigoi. And then, all of a sudden, I had like a laundry list. Because I was thinking about Nikolai, the grandfather, you know, and he lists out Nazis, communists, Russians, and Gypsies. And then you have other candidates, Turks, Israelis, grandfathers, including him, mayors, capitalists, landowning, rich people, and it's like, you know, it just keeps going to the point that even Vlad then says, what about me? Maybe I am too. I really want to hear you talk about this phenomenon in the film.
I mean, one of the things that was really fun about making it was that everyone on set would argue about who was Strigoi and who wasn't in the actual, of the characters. Like, all of the actors playing the characters would get into big fights about who was a Strigoi and who wasn't a Strigoi. And I used to just kind of sit back and watch them and kind of enjoy it. Because I didn't want to be that, I thought some of the fun of it, for me, is not having the answers, because, you know, I think that's always that's the other thing, who is the bad guy, and you know, if it is his grandfather as well, and if it is maybe him too, if he's, you know, if anyone and anything is capable of this, of being a bloodsucker, of being, you know, of being a Strigoi, of being sort of evil. I kind of, very intentionally, I think at one point I sort of figured out who was Strigoi. I never introduced the arguments with anyone else. I think I prefer it not to be so cut and dry. And I think anything I read as well, anytime I read about Strigoi, anytime I was doing my research, there were a million different things it could or couldn't be. And I think it's also, again, it was maybe back a little bit almost to the, I would say it was a little bit like some of the traditions of who's a witch in Scottish tradition. And, you know, in the villages, the person who's accused of being a Strigoi, or a person, it was kind of really hated often times, you know, and it was, you know, if somebody's sick, whose fault is it, you know, who's looked at you funny, who's the least popular, who's, you know, I think there's a lot of that going on as well, as there generally is in these kind of folk traditions. So, I think there were ones who were obviously Strigoi in the film, but I never wanted to be definitive about it.
I appreciate that. Personally, at the end, when we see the bumps or the bite marks on various people, I do enjoy that ambiguity, so I appreciate that. Rick, do you want to open it to the audience?
That's fine with me.
We have tons more questions.
I have other questions too, but hey, whenever we get them.
Does anyone in the audience want to ask a question?
Should we need them to come up and use the mic or?
Yeah, if you do have a question, please come up and use this microphone right here. Jump in, make sure that's on.
Will this one work or do we need to?
Let's see. Again, thank you for your patience as we figure out the logistics of the room.
A little feedback. I'm not sure why. Shall I just turn this on?
In the movie, there was a lot of like emphasis on like land ownership and things like that, as well as there was a lot of breaking and entering and going into places uninvited. And we were talking about how the Romanians kind of lack like Western vampire like traditions and stuff like that. Was it like intentionally like trying to, or kind of partially making fun of like the they have to be invited in thing, or was that just like something that ended up happening?
That's funny. To be honest, I probably didn't worry too much about the sort of the traditional Hollywood vampire things. It's funny. I don't think I actually really thought too much about that reference. It was really just so much that is, you know, the land and the land ownership has been so much part of the transition from, you know, sort of pre-communist times to communism to capitalism. So much of that has been about who owns what, and you know, so that was a very large element of it. But yeah, I mean, I think we did do some sort of piss taking about the Hollywood traditions, and yeah, but most of the time, yeah, I just ignored. Yeah.
Thank you. I really enjoyed the movie.
Thank you so much. It's really lovely that it's being played. You know, I was just thinking it's about 11 years since it was released, so it's really, really, really great that you guys are playing it.
Thank you.
I had a question about hunger and thirst throughout the movie, whether it be everyone sharing food, everyone sharing drinks, cigarettes, or whether it be the want for flesh or blood. And I wanted to know if that was a part of you wanting to show how similar the Strigoi and the regular people are, or if it was like a part of the ambiguity of who is what, because I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, I think it was just a part of showing, you know, just how similar everyone is in a way, and also those kind of appetites are normal appetites, and they become distorted in the Strigoi, but as you say, it's everyone in the film wants something. Everybody's greedy in some way. Everybody's, you know, drinks.
Thank you.
Great question.
Thank you.
Anyone else in the audience with a question? Ricky?
As do I. I mean, one thing that surprised me on that very topic was when Claude is describing having been working in that chicken hut restaurant. We had watched earlier Ileana in Mara's kitchen, Ileana being the now Strigoi. I don't know if it was a former one.
Sorry, I can't hear very well. Sorry, I can't hear very well. Can you repeat the question? Sorry.
Yeah.
I think it's cutting out a little bit.
There's a scene we watch while Claude is describing how bad it was to work in the chicken hut in Venice, and how awful it was. And when we watch, the customers are behaving the exact same way Leona does in Mara's kitchen, with the same kind of gluttonous, awful, disgusting what they're consuming. And we don't have any notion that they really are these people, Strigoi or not, that's not the point, but there's this kind of disgusting consumption there that it works over in Italy as well as it does in Romania. So.
Yeah. Yeah, and again, if I remember correctly, and it's been a while, he's actually been fed on at the same time that he's remembering, he's sort of dreaming and remembering all of this stuff. So it is, you know, very much sort of the idea is he's being, I don't know, consumed a bit in the village, that he is becoming more disgusted by the people around him, but also, yeah, the idea of the kind of his disgust of the food in the chicken place as well.
And we get that other memory of him, his reluctance to kill the chicken to then be consumed. So we see every part of the cycle of feeding in this film.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and again, you know, it's very much village life. Is being very pragmatic about life and death and killing.
For me, there's a moment when I thought perhaps you were developing a contagion here.
Okay.
And I say that because of the red pustules that keep showing up on Vlad's body and on others. And then I thought maybe, in fact, you know, you were going in a direction like that because of snowflakes, which is about some kind of contagious something or other. And then that just kind of stays there at a level that never quite comes out fully. And I wasn't sure if this was about the folktales and how they operate, or maybe your interest in those kinds of stories. But I'm just curious about the pustules and or contagion as a possible further issue in the story.
I suppose the idea is a contagion happens through the feeding. The idea is that people are getting the kind of the lumps and bumps when they're being fed on. So, you know, that is more a very direct idea of contagion between the Strigoi and who they're feeding on. So yes, but you know, quite a sort of direct contagion, yeah.
Okay.
Personal.
One of the, speaking of the personal, one of the interesting things about the Dracula, the humanoid cinematic vampire, is that intimacy of the bite, coming close, that exchange of fluids. The Strigoi are often depicted as having those long, protruding tongues. It's a very different.
Funny enough, I suppose sort of looking at those two traditions, and there is the kind of the sexy vampire, whereas I think Strigoi is more, you know, the kind of folkloric one where it is, you know, if someone gets sick or if somebody's, you know, chicken dies or something, you know what I mean? That it is, and I think Bram Stoker was very influenced because there had been these sort of outbreaks of vampire-like contagions in Eastern Europe at the time, and I think some of those were certainly in Romania, but those contagions were often, you know, that there would be some sort of disease that would go through a village, and everyone would blame Strigoi, or everyone would blame some sort of supernatural legend, rather than obviously understanding that it was a disease. So yeah, that's not sexy, and I think so many of those kind of more prosaic folklore stories, they aren't generally about the sexy stuff. I think they are so much more about the sort of everyday life and death stuff, and I think and local jealousies and local hatreds, and I think you know, it's interesting that Bram Stoker took something that really wasn't sexy, but then added this, you know, very kind of this different historical element. He changed the class folklore vampire traditions were villagers, they were working class people, whereas, you know, he's the one who kind of, you know, made him violent, you know, made him far more aristocratic.
And rakish. And yet there is such intimacy in your film, the villagers, with Vlad and his grandfather, with Mara. So you really did find a way to bring out that human connection in these, I'm going to call them monsters, but monsters, as we know.
Well, and you know, a lot of the characters, a lot of things are based on real stories of real people. So a lot of it is actually, you know, from real people I met, or real people I know, or real things that happen. So, which is strange to say when you know these vampires, but you know, a lot of it was, you know, me wanting to put down these people, put down the people I met, that I knew, that I cared about, you know, in film.
Hey, I'm teaching some classes on monsters currently. We talk a great deal about what monsters can teach us about being human. There are a number of my students in the audience right now. They are about to start making original monster movies. And we always use monster in scare quotes in the class. Because again, not all monsters are scary, not all monsters are monstrous. Sometimes they're just different. What advice can you give to these burgeoning filmmakers about making a movie about monsters that might tell us a little bit more about what monsters mean to us than what we might be used to seeing on screen? Does that question make sense?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard because it's always things that whenever I start any kind of story, it's not usually, I'm not usually trying to, it's not usually intentional. I think the thing that's always really important is to look at what you don't want to look at, but to try and find the thing that makes you uncomfortable. Like rather than, you know, try to do some sort of identity out of monsters you like, think about you. What scares the crap out of you? What do you find uncomfortable? What do you not want to look at? What do you not want to face? And I think that's always, the monster's always the part that you know, that we find hard to acknowledge, that we find hard to deal with, that we don't want to look at. And I think, yeah, whatever it is that you actually don't want to write about in a way, is the thing that's probably going to be the most interesting.
Really great advice.
I mean, one version of that is how I began to respond to especially Ileana and Constantine as Strigoi, because they're somewhat frightening, and yet they don't seem particularly powerful in another way, and they seem completely locked into something they can't get out of. Constantine can't seem to think about anything else except land, land, and land. And Ileana is struck by her need to have nothing but food, food, food. There doesn't seem to be any moment of, wait a minute, I'm more powerful than these other folks now. Why don't I do something else? Or couldn't I? That never seems to have occurred for these folks. Unless maybe for Vlad, who is saying, without a full strategy, let's do something else. Let's try to find a way to change this.
Yeah, I think that's it. I think, you know, the idea is that sort of in their depth, they're just more extreme, far more extreme, as you say, mindless versions or less. Ileana almost doesn't have any kind of existence except, more foods. And again, you know, Constantine to a different extent. Yeah, definitely Vlad is a character who is trying to find another way of getting.
Because it really struck me that she's another source for a lot of modern notions of vampires and Rae's. She seems to hold out this notion that, okay, you can live for centuries and you can get some troughs and bad times, but you can remake yourself completely as a vampire. You can try different lives and become different things because of this marvelous, somewhat questionable gift you've been given. And Blog has no such enthusiasm, of course, but at least he's going to do something. At least he's going
Yeah, and I suppose it's perhaps my view of human nature a bit more is, and again, it's these things like, corruption, and I mean, at the moment, especially, like, how many times do we make the same mistakes, and we have an appetite to make the same mistakes, generation after generation, century after century. Perhaps I have a little bit less faith that, a person given likes of years is actually capable of necessarily changing. I suppose, in the way that an ice vampire might change or something like that. But definitely the Strigoi, kind of that folklore vampire that I'm kind of interested in. I find more real. Certainly doesn't have that almost philosophical thought experiments, man is God type, narrative anyway.
What else do I have? I guess I'm really interested in this because of Nikolai too. Because when Nikolai goes through his litany, and his is Nazis, communist Russians, and then we get later, to quote the film, fucking capitalists. It seems like it's just more of the same. You can put a different label on these, but
I think that was his character was based on a couple of men I knew, and it was for them, and I think there was a generation of Romanians who they were conscripted into German army, and of course, Germans lost. I mean, they were just peasants. They just showed up and, lost their limbs and had to walk back. Then the Russians invaded and told, at the time, really just raped and pillaged. Then they lost their lands, the communist farms, and then it's supposed to be this freedom of capitalism of the revolution. And yet, we're saying sadly in many ways. So absolutely, these are four. He was one of the main reasons I wanted to do it, because I think, we talk about history being written by winners, and there do seem to be these pockets in so many different histories where people who really did just get shafted by successive governments or regimes, like nobody ever hears their stories, and they must be really fucking interesting. And I did find the stories of the old men in villages just really, really interesting because there isn't anyone tougher. I mean, the actor who actually played Nikolai was born in a concentration camp. He's from a Jewish theatre in Bucharest. And, he's the only person I've ever met who's, actually met a real Nazi sort of thing. But, he's certainly younger than the man he was playing, but just amazing characters and amazing to have gone through that much shit and still be standing.
You mentioned in an interview that speculative characters allow us to have these conversations. It strikes me that the vampire and the Strigoi is really apt for this idea of the revenant, of the returned, of the disenfranchised, of someone who needs to both learn how to function in a new world where they're disempowered and maintain their power. The vampire needs to continue to feed as the centuries go on and pass for human or not. And land, of course, plays a tremendous role in vampire folklore. Dracula traveling with his many, many qualities. How do you see this story as facilitating your
It's funny that you look at it. For me, from that perspective, because my perspective is vampires are people who won't go away. You know what I mean? They're the people who, I don't know whether it's how any of us ever get over our families or being sort of, how do people get over a terrible political regime or any of these kind of traumas. I mean, these things and these people won't go away. So you have to deal with them. And I think I'm probably, rather than, I guess my perspective is not of the vampire's perspective, my perspective is of the person who has to deal with vampires, perhaps. And I think, for me, they're rather than, it's that idea that there are these parts of human nature, these characters that they are so deep rooted in our culture, in our whether it's personal or country or wider culture, that there are these characters that just won't go away.
We have time for one more minute.
I have one more.
Oh, I'm not here. Oh.
I'm trying to control the feedback. This is like a standard question people often use, but I'm intrigued by this because I could think of quickly directors or work that I could imagine you were influenced by when watching Changeling and some of these other films. But with Strigoi, I just feel like it's sui generis in many respects. I couldn't think of another director where I went, bet you she thinks that this person or this film is particularly important for what she did here, but I'm going to ask anyway and say, do you think there are folks who really gave you something that found its way into this film for Strigoi?
It wasn't, again, it was such a sort of a long film in that, and I often tend to find myself in this kind of territory, and it's not really like anything else particularly. I mean, C.H.A.T.S is one of the few who sort of really explored sort of Eastern European culture from that kind of, on that level, in the time of gypsies, and black hat, white hat, probably more than anything else. So there's certainly people who have sort of been in that realm. I think I was more interested in trying to capture the reality, or how I saw the reality of the village life, but in a cinematic way, obviously with a lot of kind of humor and than particularly being influenced by anyone. There probably are. I'm sure there were people. I mean, it's such a long time ago. I'm sure there were lots of films that I, had a look at and referenced in ways. I can't think of that. I liked a lot of screwball stuff. I mean, so certainly that kind of really black humor. I don't know. Films are very different. Like something like Barney or Release is very different, but it uses the absolute blackness of humor. He was actually talking about class, apparently. It never feels like that when you're watching a film, but apparently that was his intention. I like things like maybe in the Coen Brothers, something like Miller's Crossing, where it's that you never quite know. He never knows which side he's on, I think, the whole way through. It's all sort of impenetrable, and he doesn't really know what's going on either half the time. So something like that. I'm sure there's more. I don't know.
Are you trying to say that
but a lot of the time, there'll be a little thing here or a little thing there. There's so much that I love to watch, but it's a very unlikely to be anything where I wholesale say, well, I'm going to make something like this. It's usually something in real life that I think, well, no one's told that story, or no one's captured that story, or that character, or that perspective. So I'd like to do that,
For sure. That's my sense.
Well, Faye, those of us who study monsters were familiar with the Strigoi, but I just wanted to thank you for bringing a dynamic to this festival and to our students that maybe they weren't familiar with. in bringing tradition back to this sort of vampire story, and I keep using that word because Vlad does. So we see that mix of old and new as well. But in bringing something traditional to the vampire narrative, it seems to me like you did something entirely new and entirely fresh. And I truly appreciated that. I hope the students did as well. I look forward to speaking with them in class later this week about what we've seen, and I wanted to thank you for joining us today. What an absolute treat to have you here. Thank you so much. And everyone, can you join me in thanking Faye Jackson?
No, thank you very much. As I say, it's brilliant that we're still watching it. It's great, and it's funny now because I do see now it still seems to be the only movie that's actually about, the vampires that Romanians actually believe in. It's really exciting now because I do see more and more local, folkloric type monster movies and international films that are very much about the legends of different countries. And I think that's something that's becoming more common now. And it's great, it's always really sort of fascinating to see monsters from just hugely different perspectives. But thank you very much.
Thank you.
Future projects.
Thank you.
Good luck with future projects, whenever they come in.
Very much. Thank you.
Yes, we look forward to more. Have a wonderful night. I know the time difference is quite different time where you are. Thank you again for joining us. Have a wonderful night. It was lovely speaking with you. I'll be in touch.
My pleasure. Thank you very much. Bye.
Bye.